Inflation has been in the news a lot lately here in 2022, so let me go through the basics of what inflation is and why it's making headlines again. Hello everyone, my name is Rooshocks, and today we're going to be talking about inflation. So you may have noticed going to the grocery shop lately that your shopping just seems to be costing you a little bit more. I know I have, and I'm thinking, gee, what's going on? Am I buying more stuff? But it's not that, it's something called inflation. So it's the price of goods have been going up, or in other terms, your purchasing power of your money has been going down. This has been hitting the news a lot lately, and it can be in articles talking about the cost of groceries going up, or you may have noticed fuel prices are going up and therefore that gets talked about. Or you may even be hearing them talking about monetary policy and interest rates and inflation rates, and people start to get pretty overwhelmed by all of this. So I want to go through a real basic explanation of what inflation is and why it's making headlines here in 2022, and kind of what interest rates have to do with that, because they do heavily link into each other. So one of the most basic definitions of inflation is that inflation is the decline of purchasing power of your money over time. So what that means in a real basic terms is that your money isn't worth as much in the future as what it is today. It won't buy as much stuff. So a real basic example is we could say a loaf of bread may cost you $2 today, and it may cost you $3 in a year time. So therefore, that $2 that you had can no longer buy you the same goods or services. So therefore, it's not worth as much. The purchasing power of that money is going backwards. And I'll talk about it a little bit throughout the video, but this is why people choose to invest their money, for instance, because if your money is going backwards in purchasing power and it's just sitting there in cash or sitting there in a bank account not earning interest, it's actually slowly dwindling away as far as it comes to your overall purchasing power. Whereas if you're investing in something that's, say, returning 5 or 6%, if that's higher than the inflation rate, then you are getting a positive return after inflation. So that's definitely something to consider about where you're storing money, especially if you've got significant sums of it. Now, inflation can be viewed as a positive and a negative. It just depends on who you ask. There's going to be different people that have different views on what kind of inflation rate should we aim for. Is inflation good at all? Should we not have it? Should we go for a really high inflation rate? People are going to have differing views, and you're never going to get a whole consensus agreement on this issue. And I'm not going to talk about it a lot today, but something we can all agree on is hyperinflation is not good. So go and search hyperinflation and see some of the crazy things that have happened in some countries in the past, or that are probably still happening in a few at the moment, where their money becomes so worthless that they're actually using the notes for other purposes, not even to exchange for goods and services. Now, the way that we typically will measure inflation is we talk about inflation rates, and the way that we do measure that here in Australia is the Consumer Price Index, so the CPI. You'll hear that talked about, and that rate is based on a basket of goods and services that they measure once on day one, and then I think they measure it every 3 months. So when they measure it 90 days later, they measure what the cost is, and you're comparing that cost with what the original cost is, how much has it gone up by, and therefore you get your CPI increase or your inflation rate. And within this, they have different categories. So obviously different sectors may have a higher increase at the time. So fuel prices can jump right around. So the fuel for a quarter may have significantly jumped, and the rate on that may be higher, but then maybe overall groceries may be slightly lower. So they combine all these into an inflation rate. But as I said, different categories could have different rates at different times. Now, before I do jump in and talk about why inflation is in the news again in 2022, if you haven't already, I'd love for you to join the Rooshocks Discord. I'll leave the link in the description of this video. And it's a place where we can talk about tax, business, crypto, NFTs, monetary policy if you want. Any of those kind of things. And there's been some really great discussion happening in the community there. And it's also the place where I'm talking about Rooshocks, my NFT project, where you can buy an NFT and get tax returns or business strategy sessions or even free gifts. So I'd love to have you there. Make sure you jump into that link below and join the Discord. Anyway, let's get back into the video. Now, why is inflation hitting the headlines again in 2022? Well, it's articles like this one I found on the CNBC, where they're talking about inflation rates hitting 7.5% annually in America, and that's the highest since 1982. So anytime you have anything to do with monetary policy and you're talking about the highest rates for 40 years, it's definitely going to hit headlines. And a lot of it is going to cause fear in people because a lot of people don't really understand inflation. So as soon as they hear that, they're definitely going to start to panic. Now, I believe the US Treasury has a goal rate of around the 2%. So 7.5 is obviously significantly above this. And what this is saying is that the cost of goods are going up at a really high pace. So this has happened because of what's happened in the world over the last few years. There's been a lot of money printing happening by governments to try and stimulate their economy and get businesses through tough times, through lockdowns, etc. And sometimes this can cause these kind of issues because they're printing more and more money. And that starts to give the concept that, well, maybe that money's not worth as much because there's more and more of it. Now, it's a pretty complex area, and I'm not going to go into too much detail, but there's some countries that have had success with doing this and have managed to still keep inflation rates relatively steady. So Japan's an example of that. But in traditional means, the more money you print, the less value it potentially is going to have, and therefore it potentially is going to drive up inflation rates. So it's always a balancing act of, well, do we need to print more money to stimulate the economy, all those kind of things, versus, well, we don't want inflation rates to then just negate the effects of that. And we've currently got supply chain issues that are increasing prices, so people are struggling to get things done. Therefore, some people are paying more. They'll pay a premium to get something done quicker over other people that are waiting. So this can push prices up, or it just pushes them up in general because the price of raw materials is going up because people can't get their hands on them. So all of these things combined are starting to put that pressure, and then what happens is the inflation, the price of goods and services go up because businesses then have to put their prices up to be able to stay afloat. And the issue with this then, if wages aren't increasing at the same rate, people's purchasing power is going down overall. They can't afford as much. So when they previously were earning $1,000 a week and spending maybe 10% on groceries, they were spending $100. Suddenly they're still earning that $1,000, and say groceries have gone up to $150. So suddenly it's 15% of their income is going towards that. So you can see, well, something's got to give there. Where are they going to have to cut a budget back because the cost to buy their groceries has gone up, but their wage hasn't? The reason I mentioned interest rates earlier is that this is where sometimes governments will step in and they'll increase interest rates. And their reasoning typically behind this is to slow the rate of inflation, because it means that interest rates are going up. It means people are putting more money towards their loans because they're having to pay a higher rate of interest, and therefore maybe they're not spending as much on other things. It just can pull that inflation rate back down, but it can get a very negative view by people or the media or businesses because people don't like when interest rates go up typically. So for the everyday person, they typically go, well, if my interest rate goes up, it means my home loan is going to go up, which means, again, I have to find more funds to pay that. It's going to put a stretch on people. And what that typically may mean is that therefore people aren't going to be going and buying higher priced houses. So it may slow the housing growth, for instance, or any asset where you're having to get loans for it, is that people maybe not be able to get approved for those loans, or they may be not able to afford them, and therefore it's going to halt some of that growth. And overall, this is their aim of trying to bring that inflation back down. But it is definitely a balancing act. I'm not an expert in this area. I'm just trying to give you a basic overview of, how these things are linked. We do run into some risks there. If people can't afford their mortgages, they're going to default on that. And if people start to default, we can start to have a bit of a snowball effect and we can have a crash. And all these things have happened in the past and they are scary things. But overall, there's not a lot you as a person can do about these things. So I think having that understanding of, look, what inflation is, what are you doing with your money? Are you investing it? Are you saving it? Have you got buffers in your budgets? Is going to really prepare you for these types of situations. You should always be looking at what ways can you either cut something on your budget, or ideally, what ways can you increase your wage? Can you aim for a promotion? Can you start a side hustle? Do you want to start up a full-time business? All these different things that you can do to hopefully put yourself in a better money position, and therefore you're going to be able to ride the bumps if inflation does go up or your interest rate goes up. You've got that stretch room in your budget to cover those things. I hope that video has been helpful. Make sure you've hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and please go and check out more of my content on my channel. It'll really mean the world to me. I thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you again on the next video.